I just read a 400-page novel on the Prophet of Islam, the Messenger of Allah, Muhammad, marrying a 6-year-old, and if you came here for some arbitrary number, I'd say 5 out of 10. I'm kind of mixed on this. This is a long video, and I know that. It's about a book not everyone knows or cares about. Doubly boring. Even more so, I have no idea what to put in the background here, because it's like a book, so am I supposed to show text on it? And are you going to read it? No, you're not. So, I think that's all I wanted to say. Just listen to this in the background or something. This script doesn't even go through the plot of the book, or go through every story beat. It's just a pure review. I also shaved. I got a haircut. I don't look like a stud anymore. The joke's over from the last video. That's all that's out of the way now. After reading the scathingly negative reviews, I didn't expect to love it in the end, and that was definitely the case. However, I still heavily enjoyed it, from its characters, the acting, and how much I learned from this book about the history of Islam and the struggles our prophet went through. To start off, I'll say that I was hesitant on its contents being faithful, and I'm not a professor, but I don't think it's 100% accurate. So keep in mind whenever I review the aspects of this book, in no way am I talking about the real historical religious figures. I'm purely talking about the characters inside this book. The book itself says in the very beginning, "The Jewel of Medina is a work of fiction. All characters with the exception of well-known historical figures herein, and all dialogue are products of the author's imagination." There you go. In the end, I labeled it as a reimagining of historical events instead of facts. It's basically a dramatic romance between Aisha and the Prophet, dealing with her struggles of being a woman during that time, Muhammad's struggles of being the prophet of a new religion, going to wars and such, against warring factions, and exploring their relationship with them, as well as all of his wives. Before we get into anything, I'm adding a new criteria to every book review ever. The smell. When I opened the package and wafted its scent, it was heavenly in itself. It was like Christmas morning, and since this is basically my Christmas gift to myself, I know exactly what it smells like, but the problem is the smell of what the book smells like, not the smell of the book. It's kind of hard to explain. It smells like the classic, ancient, dusty book smell, but it also has a flavor on top of it. It smells like water. Like the idealist sense of what water should smell like. It doesn't smell like a water bottle, it smells like a river or a waterfall. Anyways, that joke's over. Smell really just caught me off guard. That should also tell you how exhaustive I'm going to be in this review, if the length of this video should signify that already. I think in this review I'll talk about everything that isn't the plot, and I mean I'll give it a vague idea of what it happens, but the thing is I did create a log or a diary of sorts with me, synopsizing every chapter after I read it, and there's 33 chapters, and even if each took a minute to read, which it definitely won't, it still would be 30 minutes long, so if you want to read it, I might put it into the comment section or the description if they allow 5,000 word texts, or maybe I'll just read it in another video. I mean, for the people that really want to know what happens on every story beat in this book, you know. Before I explain the story loop, I'll explain the setting. I didn't really have an idea for what our prophet was doing when he was alive, well, besides spreading the word of Islam, but I think this book gave a simple idea of what the state of the world was back then. Basically, every population was divided into large factions, and these large factions is either on your side or against you. This book focuses on, well, the Empire of Islam, and often mentions the Quraysh faction and their leader Abu Sufyan, that acts as rivals, wanting to destroy them because they were defiled by Islamic people for worshipping idols. There's also connections to the Jews and the Hebrew factions, some friends, some enemies to the Islamic faction, and from other countries like Yemen, Egypt, and the Byzantine Empire. They'd get involved when they were, impressed from the Islam Empire's victories. I guess besides that, they had societal problems in society, and individual factions like feeding the poor, food, agriculture, clothing, and relationships between people by marriage, and everyone seems to be family or something. I think I got away from this point, so I'm just going to summarize the story. So, the story loop happens after Aisha's childhood arc and when she gets married to Muhammad. Before that, she had dreams of marrying Safwan, some handsome boy, and she enjoyed playing with dolls and also practicing her swordsmanship because she was a feisty fella. She got forced into Purra, which means she's forced to stay in her home until she's married, which was from 6 to 9 years old. That's when she holds the wedding ceremony and lives with the Prophet. The story loop is basically either Aisha gets drafted into war, and when she's not doing that, Muhammad marries a new wife, and there's a conflict between them. Besides that, Muhammad cycles through meeting his wives every different night, so he only meets with Aisha every few days, and they have a lot of arguments. Noting Aisha's attempt to seduce him even though she's like 12 years old, and then they argue about something because of her default emotion is jealousy. I'll explain my problem with her later on, but yeah, that's the story loop. Of course, a lot more than those things happened. Sometimes in the war, the enemy has some cruel tactic, important allies die, Aisha tries to barge in and fight, but they never let an underage, fight. Some wives have babies. I think I'm just saying vague stuff that happens in the story. I'm more of a detailistic person, honestly. Anyways, if you want to read more, I put it into the description or the comments or whenever I'm gonna put that thing. And even then, I still leave out a lot of details that I liked. Speaking of which, the way the author writes, this being the author's debut title, it's kind of amateurish. The way she describes a scene is awkward to say. I'm gonna read a passage and let you judge for yourself. I let my eyelids fall shut, avoiding my reflection in the stares of my ummah, my community. I licked my cracked lips, tasting salt and the tang of my wretchedness. Pain wrung my stomach like strong hands squeezing water from laundry, only I was already dry. My tongue lolled like a sun-baked lizard. I rested my cheek against Safwan's shoulder, but the horse's trot struck bone against bone. It's kinda cringy, but it's okay, I guess. As a conclusion to the plot, interesting things do happen, and there are enjoyable brief moments, but I'll be honest, Aisha is kind of stuck in an emotional rut of being in a lot of conflict, mostly between her sister wives and their relationship with Muhammad, and it'll rub off on the reader. There's some interesting conflicts they face, but some get repetitive. When I read negative reviews online, I found myself plainly disagreeing with a lot of remarks. I expect these reviewers to be the pompous, frou-frou, experienced novel readers, while personally I'm not very experienced with novels. I mean, I read these children's novels when I was young, not mentioning manga or comics and this light novel thing and this Doctor Who thing recently. Anyways, I'm telling you I can read, but I'm not a full-on thick novel fella. So when I saw these reviewers call the book boring or the characterization not engaging, I scoffed hard. I legitimately can't put this book down sometimes. I would end a chapter, then immediately want to dive into the next one. I'd waste like an hour by complete accident, so I'm just surprised these expert novelists, I assume, to not even stomach 100 pages before quitting. The second was the characterization, and this time I can at least somewhat agree. I don't like how some of it was handled. One very prominent theme throughout the entire book is envy and jealousy, particularly from Aisha and her sister wives, with the Prophet seeming to play favorites whenever he gets a new wife to ogle. Jealousy is a relatable human emotion. I get it. but I believe it's purely avoidable from innate characteristics. Just accept your position or status, swallow your pride, and respect the person you're jealous of, which is something Aisha had to learn instead of have this simple trait. In fact, Sauda, one of the wives, rarely feels any jealousy, and the other sister wives do get somewhat jealous, but still act adult and respectful, unlike Aisha at the start. I know that's what character flaws are, just learn from them, but jealousy is relatively simple to overcome, more than most. Even then, the problem isn't the flaw in and of itself, it's the process of overcoming it. It's just repetitive. She experiences jealousy whenever Muhammad even mentions his other wives or anything that isn't her, and he marries 7 other wives. Imagine re-experiencing the same conflict 7 times. Again, maybe it's not relatable, but this novel tries its best to make you feel sympathetic, especially with the fact that comparing her background, she spent her childhood with the Prophet, so she knew him all her life, while the other wives were widows and had a past that isn't related to him, or just didn't have as much of a deep connection. It's still inexcusable she hasn't found something else to do besides have her be all of Muhammad's attention and vie for his love, and envy whenever she gets a new wife all the time. Fortunately, she receives a revelation that she should just stop being his lover, but also be useful to him by being a political advisor of some sort, which is a good change of pace. Sadly, this happens quite deep into the story, so readers would have to slog through a big well of jealousy and hatred to get it. Here's my rundown on every wife or something. The last chapter tackled the main problem I had with the story, being repetitive with its characterization. However, I believe it nails at least the few defining traits of the other characters that aren't Aisha nor the Prophet. I would like to go into a deep dive of the characterization of every wife that Muhammad had, because I love them so much that I can analyze and talk about quite a few of them extensively. However, I don't think anyone would want that as much as I'll do, so I'll synopsize. I'll go in chronological order. Khadija. Sadly, the book doesn't mention her often since she passed away before Aisha's time and the book focuses on her. Even then, there were sources online that should have made her a mention-worthy character. Aisha said, and I quote, "I did not feel jealous of any of the wives of the Prophet as much as I did of Khadija. Though I did not see her, the Prophet used to mention her very often, and whenever he slaughtered a sheep, he would cut its parts and send them to the woman friends of Khadija. When I sometimes said to him, 'You treat Khadija in such a way as if there is no woman on earth except Khadija,' he would say Khadija was such and such, and from her I had children." And in this book, she's not even mentioned, so I don't know what that's about. Sauda, the second wife of Muhammad, seems to just be a nice, caring lady who's also described in the book as lean and muscular, which I find very nice. However, I can't find the page, so you're just gonna have to trust me on this one. I will try very hard to find it again. I really like her. She complains the least, as I mentioned, indifferent to the other wives' relation to Muhammad, meaning not jealous for once. You will see that jealousy runs throughout the sister-wives relationships very prominently, so it's a big deal that Sauda is not affected, especially since she's not the age of fertility anymore, so she can't even argue with him about bearing Muhammad's children. She's always on Aisha's side, pretty much being a very positive person, meaning she can tolerate Aisha's kind of brash, childish behavior at first, and willing to share Muhammad as sister wives. Also, mentioned to be the only wife actually having something to do. Yeah, Aisha mentions there's a lot of ire and tension between the sister wives because they just do not have anything to do. Meanwhile, Sauda keeps herself busy with making embroidery and selling it in the Medina market. So yeah, I love Sauda. She's always good to see. The titular Aisha. Kind of. It's called the Jewel of Medina, whatever. I might as well discuss her character in this section. I've discussed how she's jealous, and quite often, but this is mixed with her quick-witted, playful personality. She stands her ground and can get sharp-tongued when she needs to, but most of the time when she doesn't need to, as we see, saying more harsh words than she needs to. This gives off the impression she's more childish and a spoiled brat at the start, but watching her mature and age naturally through the course of the book makes her a very endearing protagonist, who still hangs on to her pride and wise beyond her years. Now, I've heard online that this kind of comes off as a feminist propaganda, having a strong female character who doesn't need no man, but that's not generally the case. She was always quick-witted and, well, strong from multiple accounts in the past, so I suppose Aisha happened to have these progressive traits that were then transformed into this more feministic SJW thing, you know. I'm honestly really into the strong female archetype. Good for them. Good for her. Hafsa. Aisha and Hafsa share a very close relationship, and the way the story buds these two characters throughout the story makes their relationship one of my favorites in the entire book, even more so than Aisha and the Prophet. So, at first, naturally, when Hafsa's wedding happened, Aisha was incredibly jealous. Was Muhammad already bored of her and such? They had an argument, and Aisha, who can't control her tongue, exposes how she was only married to him because he just wanted to strengthen his alliance with her father and nothing else. Hafsa was struck back by this, and Muhammad wasn't pleased with Aisha's actions. After this incident where they kind of hated each other, they quickly began a friendship when more wives came on board. And at the end, their bond was so strong. Aisha even claimed she was the only sister wife who trusted her, and that is just beautiful. She was antagonized as a mean-spirited who then humbled, forgave, and befriended her who used to be an enemy. At one point, she helped Aisha break into Muhammad's room by pretending to see a shadow to trick the guard, and when she laughed at a certain new wife, Aisha shushed her down politely, and it's just these small interactions that build up character. I love it. Al-Masakin. With how much I loved Last View, it'll be surprising to say that this is quite possibly my favorite character in the story. When she first marries Muhammad, Aisha is jealous, as she always is. However, she actually respects her as a sister wife and acts as an equal or even humbled by her, even though she's a child compared to Hafsa's rival and other wives down the line. Before she married, she helped the tent dwellers, the poor, malnourished poverty living in the tent slums. That's why she's called the mother of the poor. Possibly one of the few wives that Muhammad married to not strengthen an alliance and just wanted to marry her to help her noble goal. Muhammad forced Aisha along with her to the tent city to help her with her chores and bring food and blankets to the poor. When al-Masakin heard Aisha was joining her, she was delighted to have her and called it an honor, which shows her humbleness. Aisha actually learnt a lesson from her about never taking things for granted after visiting the tent city, seeing the impoverished, while in comparison, she was living like a princess in the mosque with Muhammad. Then they get confronted by thugs. Aisha, always acting like a brute, wanting a sword fight, unsheaths her sword, while al-Masakin, this shy, timid woman, still able to stand her ground by flinging her medicine bag, breaking the thug's nose. I would have loved to see more of this character. However, of course, it all comes crashing down. Aisha and Sakin accompany Muhammad to a war because soldiers themselves want her, the mother of the poor, to tend to their wounds. That's really cool. But after taking care of a sick child, she contracts the child's illness, and the sickness was severe. Aisha was stuck taking care of her and imagining the alternate outcome where she stood by her side, defending against the enemy flanks, while she supported allies' soldiers on the battlefield. Instead, she lay cold dead on the ground. Yeah, one of the few nice characters in the story just dies, which I know was meant to reflect reality, but this is heartbreaking. However, it's not all for naught. Aisha, wounded by this experience, actually keeps revisiting the tent city to tend the poor because of her promise to Masakin. She still mentions her trips to the tent city years after this, tens of pages and chapters after her death, way after the reader might have forgotten about her. Aisha actually takes this to heart, and her impact has left a real impression on her. That's awesome. Sadly, this is where the development and my personal care for each personal character or sister wife decreases significantly. They are normally introduced as rude and prideful at first because of how the prophet can't stop staring at them and the amount of attention he gives to her. Then they become jealous of the next wife that comes along. Salama and Zainab act as Aisha's main rivals, being generally mean-spirited and spiteful against her. The wives after that are just kind of indifferent. Sure, they have different origins, but never had the same amount of love or care the book places on them as the first 4 wives, I'd say. Safia is the only mention-worthy one. She's around the same age as Aisha, which is cool. She also likes to spread gossip and manipulate people, normally laughing at other people's expense and telling mischievous stories. She has some playful aspect to her, I suppose. I didn't write this in the script, but Zainab, who I mentioned as a rival to Aisha, after Aisha matures and tells the prophet, hey, don't divorce any of the other wives if you want to stay with me, because she knows that if they divorce him, they'll be in a very bad state. So Zainab is the one who goes up to her and personally thanks her out of all the sister wives for doing that. So that's cool. The others, I don't even recall their names. Okay, let's talk about the main man, the prophet. How did this book portray the Holy Prophet, the messenger of God? Quite poorly, in my opinion. I mean, I knew he was a man who can have flaws, but the flaws it presents with the prophet is kind of sacrilegious. At first he was presented as a holy man, not belonging on earth, with shiny, curly, flowing black hair and a smile as bright as the sun. And he's still caring and protective, often arguing with Aisha about her safety, which is all fine and good. However, when Aisha matures and stops being childish, it seems they've switched personalities. I mean, first, in every wedding, he's described as being generally perverse, looking at every inch of his new wife, ogling at her. Now, this characteristic is just meant to incite jealousy, and even if this was realistic, the book didn't have to dote on it. The big complaint I have later on in the book is when he was arguing with his wives, but in the last few chapters, he just seems like an angry old man, bickering about her wives doing the wedding ceremony preparations together to earn money without consulting him, and if he just explained his reasoning, maybe it'd make sense, but he did not do so. He was just scolding needlessly. Besides that, he was also complaining about how having a lot of things on his mind, and none of them should be dealing with 10 jealous wives, when they should be comforting him. And I'm just like, please have some empathy, because Aisha approached him calmly and soundly while he's acting irrationally. One time he goes so mad, He just decides, I'm gonna lock myself into a room and never interact with anyone for a month. So when Aisha tries to converse with him, telling him her life story, he just sits there motionless, staring at the window, while Aisha is crying, wanting to see some kind of reaction from him, but he does not do anything. I guess I just wanted to mention that part. It was kind of heart-wrenching. I'm sure Muhammad was in a trance at that time as well. Anyways, it still stands. I understand he's just a man, and it mentions that in the book. And men have flaws, but not irrational emotions and anger. I generally do not see him as a holy figure and cannot relate to his problems most of the time. He doesn't constantly act like this, but the few times he does is sacrilege. Most of the time he's like noble and rational, so I guess it's fine. Okay, here's a new section I'm calling Sure That's Anime. I don't like the title either. I've been seeing quite a few connections, and not because I'm delusional. Okay, that's still on the table, but the term and concept in general of a harem came from a pre-Islamic civilization in the Middle East. So if anything, anime has taken pages out of this instead of the other way around. And if I threw away my dignity, as I've done so many times, and review this book not as a historical fiction and as a harem anime for the new season, it's the one I enjoyed the most out of the harem trope. Surprisingly, I'm serious. I would love more of this. It's the best I've experienced out of the genre, and for one main reason. The harem actually interacts with each other. I'm normally disappointed in most harem I watch because they just do not act like realistic people. These anime girls just want that one thing, and it's disgusting. They act completely simple-minded and only care about the MC and no one else. They just feel jealous whenever they see another woman trying to steal their man. Yeah, just behave, you're the only one who exists gets the MC. Want his D for no reason. Don't interact with the other members of his harem. Some do this right, like Bakemonogatari, and some get close, like Quintessential Quintuplets and Rosario to Vampire, I guess, having some cute interactions between the MC's harem that aren't related to the MC sometimes, but this blows it out of the park. And it makes sense. Being the Prophet Islam, he's naturally busy spreading the message of Islam and fighting wars, let alone be with all 11 of his wives all the time, so the harem makes themselves busy. As mentioned earlier, Aisha befriends some of her sister wives like Hafsa and Sauda, and they actually interact with each other, then actually develop and mature from other sister wives without being related to the Prophet whatsoever. One time, all 11 housewives set aside their differences and decide to become tire women, working to prepare wedding celebrations, and they actually start having fun with each other. It's amazing. Each time I return from my visits with al-Masakin's poor, that's an example of Aisha revisiting the tent city hundreds of pages afterwards, by the way. My sister wives would sit me in the cooking tent's nest and display their accomplishments. Salima would lift the veil from her face with a flourish, showing off her made-up eyes, or Zainab would bare her arms to show Hafsa's latest design. I'd never heard my sister wives laugh so much, or talk so eagerly together. For the first time ever, I looked forward to going home. And, hey, they're still jealous, but whenever a new wife shows up, the ones that are currently in the harem gather and jeer at the new wife together, at least, like to collectively make fun of the new wife. Muhammad traced the bruise lightly with a finger. She gazed into his eyes so knowingly I felt my face burn. Before you came to me, Prophet, I dreamt that I would be yours. In my dream, the moon lowered itself down from Medina to make love to me. Ay Allah! What a show! Zainab said in the courtyard when they had gone to rest in Muhammad's words. What a performance, you mean, Rayhana said. Safia bin Huay is a born manipulator. Did she just call him Honey Hive? Hafsa said. I thought again of how this new wife might help me. I thought she seemed nice, I said feebly. drawing a gasp from Hafsa, who stared at me as if I'd grown another head. So it hurts much more that I rarely ever see it, because in every anime ever, they only care about the MC and no one else. Even though I might not make sense in many other contexts besides this book, I would want more harems focusing on like a single female character in the harem itself. Then it could show her emotions and might lead to connections with other members to the harem. Alas, as we all know, harems are just meant for you, the viewer, as a self-insert, an audience surrogate to experience being around anime girls satisfying all the possible tropes and kinks. It could be fixed with, like, making likable, realistic characters, but nah, we can't have that. Okay, that's my harem rant. I'm not done talking about anime, though. Remember in the last video when I said there were fun moments in this book? Of course you don't. But here they are. I think most of these aren't haha funny, but borderline fan service moments. I put them here because they could probably be seen as sacrilege, to be sexualizing important religious figures. Just to start, like, Muhammad starts calling Aisha as Little Red because she has red hair and because the author thought this would be a good idea? Maybe it was? Maybe somewhat disagree. A low, steady grunting pulled my gaze to the bed. A trickle of sweat crawled down Hamal's broad, naked neck as he lifted his body off the bed and slammed it down again and again. I stared at his behind, as big as my goat's bladder ball, covered with hair as it clenched and relaxed with each thrust. Beneath him, skinny arms and legs stuck out like the limbs of a scarab beetle under a sandal, flailing and clutching at him. A girl's voice seemed to sob, and her heels pounded against his hips. I gasped and grabbed Safwan's arm. He was killing her. But when I looked at Safwan, he was grinning, and as Hamal's voice grew louder and his body slams faster, Safwan pulled me down beneath the window. Hidden from their view, we heard Hamal shout, he, like a hyena. I pretended to laugh also, not wanting him to see my horror, while the image of a girl's squashed body under that hairy beast replayed itself in my mind. I didn't get used to the way the book wrote things, so I was just incredibly confused on what was happening, but now I get it. It was sex. They were having intercourse. Some wife you are going to make. My mother raised my shirt over my head, ignoring my protests. I felt my face flame to be so exposed, and I covered my budding breasts with my arms, which made Ozma laugh. You won't keep those date seeds hidden much longer, she teased. Starting tonight, you'll have to share them with your husband. She winked at me. Just hope he doesn't nibble too hard. I felt a creeping over my skin as if I'd rolled in a nest of scorpions, and I shivered even as my sister poured hot water over my back. No consummation. I didn't know what the word meant, but it had something to do with blood. I pressed my hands harder against my chest as if my heart would burst through. Isn't this just a classic flustered token fan service moment? Her hair was the color of a brass bell. Her mouth was a red bow. She wore a blue gown that glittered as if she had been rolling in diamonds. Muhammad gazed at her, rapt, as if she were a snake charmer playing a tune with her beseeching eyes. I beg of you, Prophet of Allah, do not send me into slavery, she said in a voice as light and refreshing as rain. See how soft my hands are? Look at my skin, it has never been touched by the sun. I have lived a life of ease. Slavery would kill me. He was in truth looking at her skin. Alarm jabbed me with a sharp finger. She lowered her eyes, pulling his gaze downward to rest on her ample bosom. I am at your mercy, she said. I will do whatever you desire. Desire? Muhammad was having so many of them at that moment, they clashed like lightning bolts on his face. I could have spoken his next words before he even thought them. There is a way, he said. I can save you from slavery and avoid offending my men if you do this one thing. Anything, she said. I am your humble servant. He sank to his knees before her and took her hands in his. His eyes caressed her face as if he had loved her all his life. Marry me, he said. Sort of just an example of how expressive the writing can get on the Prophet's attractions and, more importantly, the description of his new wives. Wife? How can you call me wife when you've never been intimate with me? I am waiting out of consideration for you. Waiting for what? Waiting for me to beg you or take you by force. For you to grow up, he said darkly. From the tone of this discussion, it appears you have some distance to go. I turned my back to my parents, then untied the bodice of my chemise and pulled it open, revealing my breasts. Muhammad's eyes widened in surprise, and then, to my delight, the flicker of desire began to dance on his face. I'm not a child anymore. Having made my point, I laced up my chemise. I've literally seen this scene in anime in the exact same context. Karen Araragi, Nisei Monogatari.
そんなことだからお前はいつまで経っても大人になれねえんだよ。
私はもう大人だ。見ろこのおっぱい。
羽川の半分もない。それがどうした？
What do you think? Don't I look sexy? My, you look lovely.
Yeah, you really do, Scald. Come on, who are you trying to kid? You need to stick out in some areas while remaining flat and firm in others. That's what sexy's all about.
Hey, why don't you take a look at these? Do you see how big they are?
I'm sorry, were you saying something about big?
I don't even feel weird for putting these examples together. They have the exact same context. I've been making this video for days, so I'm just gonna end it. Bye. If you can't tell by how long I've been working on this video, I've grew some stubble, so that should tell you. Post-editing napkin here, I'll at least wrap this all up in a nice bow. The Jewel of Medina, while it tried to modernize and entertain the events during the origins of Islam so that a wider audience can understand the conflicts back then, it mischaracterizes, dishonors, and commits acts of sacrilege by making important sacred religious figures have irrational and undesirable traits. The conflicts in this story repeat themselves, and the way it's presented, as in the wording to describe events, is trying way too hard to be poetic. That's as objective and as harsh as I can get. I enjoyed moments here and there and only some of the characterization, but really as a whole it's not worth a read as it's not even faithful to real events. As a verdict, I'm putting it as like a 4 out of 10. I changed my opinion. There you go. Now I'm going to sleep. Thank you.